I just walked inside from it being about 106, feels like, here in Iowa. Jim Roemer is our guest this week on the MTOM podcast. The guy needs no introduction. We just haven't talked to him in a couple of years. Good to see you, Jim.
Great to see you too, Paul. Yeah, it's been a long time. I miss Iowa, miss all my friends back there, and hopefully you'll come visit sometime soon. But anyway.
If you would just bring your air conditioner, I think you'd have a lot of friends here. It's kind of warm.
It's warm down here in Florida. I moved to the East Coast in the last 15 years, and yeah, record warm ocean temperatures the last few years. Record warm weather in Europe right now, but hopefully for parts of the Corn Belt, much of it, we're going to begin to cool off a little bit more toward normal after, I think, July 4th weekend.
What we talk to you is always about the connection between weather and the commodities. You are a meteorologist and a commodities guy. You have a penchant for them both. Your two groups that I want to just mention are Weather Wealth and Climatologence. Let's just go ahead and get your promotion out of the way of the two things, the two of the bigger things that you're doing.
Yeah, there's just so much information out there. People get overloaded with so much information. I try to refine things. Weather Wealth, I've had for 7 or 8 years, is a newsletter that coffee producers, Midwest grain farmers, natural gas traders all over the world use. Get my updates, not just on weather forecasts, but trading ideas and hedging. It's fairly expensive, but it hopefully helps a lot of people and is worth it. Climatologence, just started in the last 2 months, is on Substack, and it's really inexpensive. One trade alone, like being bearish corn at $5 during all the hype of the Iran war a month and a half ago, pays for it easily for a year or two. So if I can help farmers make better business decisions in farming and trading, that's what we have to help everybody.
When you type the letter E on your keyboard, does the autocomplete just go El Niño on everything you're writing about?
It just about does. Yeah, but there are other teleconnections other than El Niño that are really, really important for our summer forecast for Midwest grains and global commodities, agricultural commodities. So there's a lot of hype about El Niño right now. It's certainly strengthening very, very quickly. Unlike 83, we had a super El Niño, Paul, and it weakened. And as it weakened so suddenly, the ridge built north. We had one of the worst droughts, obviously, in decades. So hopefully that's not going to happen with a strengthening El Niño this summer.
1983 is always a year that gets people's attention, especially in Iowa and in the Corn Belt, for A, the heat, B, the drought. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's start here. I'm going to do like what I do with our friend Eric Hunt. He's got slides. You have slides. We used to put you in front of the slides and make you be a weatherman right there. But the first thing I want to start with is only 4 El Niño events out of 20 had very hot June weather in Western Europe. I want you to explain what we're seeing here. You have charted some things for those years, 76, 83, 2015, 23, and then now. Let's start with that first graphic.
Yeah, so we're having this huge ridge developing over Western Europe, and the price of corn, European corn, I think has soared 30% in 2 or 3 weeks. And usually these heat domes, these droughts in Western Europe occur during a neutral or even weak La Nina situation. So why are we having this right now? It has to do with the conveyor belt, the changing of the Atlantic Ocean currents, which I think partly is climate change and melting sea ice, and the salinity of the northern Atlantic is changing right now. So this is what is happening. There have been 4 El Nino events with record warm weather and drought developing in Europe. But again, 16 out of 20 heat waves in Europe in June and July did not have an El Nino. So what are the years, right? 76, 83, 2015, 2023. Can we draw comparisons? Boy, if we have this, right, Paul, what's going to happen in the Corn Belt in July and August for pollination and soybean pod, the soybean pod setting? And that's what the confusing thing is right now. Some of these years had really bad droughts, like 83 and 76. The other two, I think 23, we escaped a major drought. And 2015, I think, was an excellent crop year. So we look at everything, not just what's happening in Europe, but weather patterns in other parts of the world and how fast El Niño is going to strengthen to determine our forecast this summer.
In Europe, I looked at some video just before we recorded today. Everywhere you go, you hear about these people who are in the country in a place, places not without air conditioning. Everybody's trying to stay as cool as they can. They're dealing with it. Tell me how hot it is there compared to normal. And is there a spot that's hotter than others?
Well, it's interesting because I spent some summers every other summer with my girlfriend in Germany, where she's from, or even in France. We go visit, and most of the countries don't believe in air conditioners. So it's been over. I think France, Paris was like 103 degrees last week. Parts of like Barcelona over 100. Normal highs are in the mid to high 80s this time of the year. So this is happening from just a combination of factors. We don't necessarily agree it's because of El Nino, but it has to do with the change of the conveyor belt of the Atlantic and the Gulf Stream and other factors.
All right, conveyor belt. We've talked about conveyor belt a lot. We'll come back to that. I know you've come up to it a little bit. In Germany, very diverse agriculture. France, we think more of corn and wheat. What's the outlook for their crops right now?
Well, I think their corn crop will be one of the worst. I don't know if it was 2003 or 2006 that we had a crop drop in Western Europe by at least 8 to 15% below trend. The wheat market's been really kind of on its tail here the last 5 or 6 weeks. Why? Well, because it's too late to really hurt the wheat crop in Europe, right? Even though we had this drought in the plains and a big spike in wheat back in April and May, Australia's weather's improving. I'm watching all this myself, and it's in my newsletters. The spring wheat areas of Canada are doing really well right now. Ukraine has decent moisture. So even though everyone's been thinking maybe this drought would hurt the wheat crop in Europe, which I think is one of the top producers, of course, of soft red wheat, it's too late. It's mainly hurting the corn crop right now.
And that is going to mean what then for that continent and Asia and Africa? Does that open up the door for U.S. exports or other people to fill voids that might not be filled because the crop is damaged?
Well, there's a lot of irrigation.
Smaller.
Yeah, there's a lot of irrigation in China, of course, and you can't tell from one day to the next what they're doing is occasionally with a lot of their policies and acreage expansion and things like that. But some of the El Nino events do tend to have problems in parts of China, the North China Plain. And that would be good news, obviously, for American farmers. If this thing strengthens, this El Nino, depending, of course, on how much irrigation they have in some of these key provinces, it could open up the export channel, which we really need, obviously, after this war and everything else and all the trade tariffs. That would be good news, but probably good news after our harvest later this fall.
Oh, you just brought up something that I talked about with our friend Sean Hackett last week, and we'll get to that in a minute. Man, I'm teasing all this other great stuff, Jim.
All right.
Okay, let's go to this next graphic, and it is a comparison of years. It is the 1983 severe Corn Belt drought and the weakening Corn Belt. You've got a lot of blues and reds trend lines on here. Tell me what these are.
This is the chart pattern, right, of the prices of corn and soybeans. Yeah, so 1976, you'll see in the upper left, we had a kind of a rally there in soybeans during June and early July. I think there was some planting problems, some drought conditions. And then you see how both corn and soybeans kind of went lower the second half of the summer with any dryness in the Corn Belt being relieved somewhat. You look at 2023, we had kind of a flash drought. We had a big spike there. Again, blue is soybean prices and red is corn. We spiked up in June of 2023, only to see the market break about 10 to 20% the rest of the summer. Again, these are El Nino years that we look at that we think are the best fit, right? 83 we put on here just to show you what a strong El Nino could be like in the upper right, but that was weakening. Most strong El Ninos, like on the lower right, 2015, that are strengthening into the summer, not weakening. Look how we went into a bear market in July and August. So hopefully that's going to give you a little bit of light on what's going to happen this summer. If we were seeing a really super El Nino, and it was started weakening like crazy, that builds the Midwest Corn Belt ridge in July and August like 83 and creates hot dry. Are we going to have a few weather scares here or there? Perhaps. But if you look at these three charts, for the most part, the trend, once again, I think it would be the fourth summer in a row, is for neutral to probably bearish prices for most of the summer.
I'm most looking at 23, A, because it's closest to us, but B, it mirrors maybe what we saw this year around Mother's Day. Right now, we could think the season is a high a little earlier than it just seems to be getting earlier. And in 3 years since this was 23, now in 26. You could argue that a June 18, June 17 is not that different than a May 17, 18 time frame for an early peak, an early top out in price. Is there any correlation because this market has gotten earlier, it seems to be putting in the high?
Well, the difference, Paul, in 2023, we had a weak to moderate El Nino and some other teleconnections related to what's going on in India and the North Pole helped bring a really dry, I think, May and June. I believe we had half of normal rainfall over a good part of the Corn Belt and some pretty big heat, some 90s in June. So that's different this year, right? We have great soil moisture. There's a big difference.
All right. I just want to make sure. I just like, you've got it. Let's move to the predictions here. This is a chart we've seen from you many times before. This one is corn TCI impact selector. So you've got some regions that are red and one that's yellow. Any significance there in the color? What are we doing?
Okay. So this is my program, Teleconnections, right? And where it says one is obviously the Midwestern Corn Belt, particularly the Western Corn Belt there. And these are teleconnections, AO index, upper left, the Arctic Oscillation Index, what's happening over the North Pole. You'll see the AMO, what's happening in the Atlantic. It has to do with ocean temperatures across the central Atlantic. All these teleconnections I look at, and I try to use not just El Nino to come up with a summer forecast. One of the most important ones I see, look at that one, the PT index, minus 0.67 correlation. What does that mean? Nobody ever talks about that. It has to do with, it's called the Pacific Transition Index, the jet stream at about 15 to 18,000 feet that goes all the way from Asia across the North Atlantic and up across Siberia. That index is negative. And when you have a negative PT index, you have a ridge over Europe, Western Europe, like is happening right now, and you tend to have a northwest flow on average over most of the Corn Belt in July. What that means is, other than this heat here in the next few days, for the most part, July may have a northwest flow, the main dome to the southwest of the of the Corn Belt, generally decent weather. I think that's probably somewhat of a bearish scenario for corn and beans for the month of July.
Well, I think the market's starting to agree with you on that, the way it's been acting here, because that was something our friend Sean Hackett said in the most recent episode was, if the heat is for 5 days, maybe 7, the market says, talk to me in 10 or 14. That's when the market will respond. Because as I was reading this morning before we talked, Jim, is there's chances for rain in many, many places. And traders don't think that means a dry condition situation setting up.
Yeah, you're right. And like in 23, the last time we had an El Nino, and this one developing right now is much stronger. In 23, when we jumped up in prices in May and June, if we had, through mid to late June, if we had that dry, hot spring, which we didn't have this year, considering what happened with the Iran war a couple months ago and all the fertilizer issues, we would have seen corn to $6 maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, right? So the end of the war and most of the Corn Belt having forecasts for good rains. You know, I mean, it's unusual to have, I think, 4 or 5 back-to-back record corn and soybean yields. I'm tempted to think we're going to have a few weather scares here, maybe be closer to normal. But look what normal's been the last 5 or 6 years, right? I mean, in the 180s, bushels per acre. I mean, so, you know, normal now is not what it was maybe 10, 20 years ago. It's still a really good crop, right? And that's what the market's looking at. We have enough supply right now. We really need China dryness from El Nino, and then we need a drought, a legitimate drought in Argentina and South America, which happens more with La Nina, not El Nino, next year to really get, I think, a major bull market in grains for us. Yeah.
Again, I'm going to use Sean as a reference. He kind of thought the others, that if we get the El Nino in North America, that causes problems in South America now. But you're saying that might be delayed.
Well, typically an El Nino, if we have it between December and February, right, brings really good weather to Argentina and southern Brazil. Some of the northern areas, Mato Grosso, some of the key soybean growing areas, I could see below trend line. But if you go back and look at some of the real bull markets in the last like 10 to 20 years or so, they happen when La Nina, when Argentina and southern Brazil, like 2011, for example, had major droughts. And then, bam, we also had one that following summer, right? So I think the combination of La Nina that affects both Argentina and southern Brazil corn and bean production, if it continues into the spring and summer, 2011, 2012, I think 1976, then you have that double whammy of multiple countries having problems, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay. I get it. I get it. I want to move to your U.S. summer corn, soybean weather. This is kind of recapping these five pictures within a picture, kind of telling us where we're swinging. This is more of a recap for what we've already kind of talked about. These are the climactic factors that will influence our weather.
Yeah. So I think they're pretty descriptive. So you see the rapidly evolving El Nino on the upper left. Typically, if it's strong by the summer, other than 83, it tends to be cool and wet. Even though it's strengthening so rapidly right now, it's acting kind of like a weak El Nino condition. What does that mean? We could have a few weather scares here and there. Maybe August will be a little bit drier and hotter, may nip some of the soybeans unless it becomes strong. We'll have to watch it. July, though, looks relatively pretty good. Global angular momentum, also an indication of how fast El Nino is actually going to form. That has to do with torque in the atmosphere. We look at the Indian dipole, what's going on over east of Africa, number 2 there, and also over near Australia and Indonesia. A positive Indian dipole, like we're having right now, warm over Indonesia and Australia, cool off the coast of Africa, can bring some occasional warm spells to the Midwest, but nothing like a disaster like 83. That situation right now in El Nino with that positive Indian dipole, a negative Indian dipole, tends to create droughts for parts of Southeast Asia for sugar, has effects on coffee production. So that's really a big impact on soft commodities. The Antarctic Oscillation Index, a big vortex sitting over Antarctica, is a reason there'll be no freeze for Brazil coffee over the next couple months. And that tends to bring a northwest flow. You see there, kind of occasional cooler, wetter Midwest during the month of July. So I don't really expect any extreme heat and dryness for the month of July based on most of the teleconnections. Number 5, the negative Pacific Transition Index has to do with the jet stream all the way from Asia across the Pacific and the North Atlantic. That's so negative right now. It's creating this huge ridge over Western Europe. So I look at all these teleconnections. It can get very complicated, but the key is to kind of bring them all together and come up with a forecast for clients around the world.
Well, it is. Of course, it's complicated. Why would it be simple? If it was simple, I would be able to do it, and I wouldn't need to bring you into the mix, Jim. It's always fun to have you as part of this discussion. Let's go to the Pacific Transition Index, the PTI. We're not, pardon the interruption here, but maybe the two of us would make a good pair on that program. But tell me what the index is.
Well, again, it has to do with the jet stream pattern. It covers about 10 to 15,000 miles. And basically, when you have a negative Pacific Transition Index, you tend to have more of a loopy jet stream. You see that there on the left, kind of a loop, northwest flow. Occasional fronts, occasional squall lines for the Corn Belt. Any heat spells tend to be relieved by more normal temperatures. But you see that ridge build there off the coast of Spain and into much of Western Europe? That is what's called a negative PTI index. And usually within El Nino, it tends to bring decent weather for the Corn Belt. And that's what I'm looking at right now.
All right, let's go again to another Climate Predict Pro. This one, again, is the reference back. This is a new year entered into our discussion, the July 2015 temperatures in comparison.
Yeah, so the difference between July 2015 and today, we already had a super El Nino by July. Right now, it's weak, but it's developing so quickly. Positive global angular momentum, other factors. That I think that still could be one of our better analogs, even if it's not as strong this July as it was back then. I think it will be by the fall or the winter as far as the 2015 analog goes. We can talk about that some other time, how it may impact global grain production in South America. But basically, you bring all these things together. The negative PT index I just talked about, with that big ridge over Western Europe, the vortex over the South Pole, that's going to prevent a freeze for Brazil coffee over the next 2 months, their winter, and also El Nino forming. Look at the drought and heat continuing in Western Europe in July. And look how the Midwest, for the most part, kind of normal to cool. Some of the red there you see in the Delta, maybe up in the Northern Plains, Southern Canada, a little bit warmer than normal. But I don't see an extensive 1.5 to 3 weeks of 9,500-degree weather. Any heat is going to be short-lived because of all these teleconnections I put together in my program.
And then the next graph also looks at dryness in the far northern Corn Belt and the Delta there. That's just kind of a continuation. So I want to move forward again to the next chart, and that's the 2015 seems like the best match. We talked about 23 a lot. And again, you're going to talk about Dees corn from 15 and November beans in 15.
Well, again, one cannot really draw a direct one-to-one correlation with any particular analog year. We just get a general idea. Things have changed. The oceans have warmed up so much. The Arctic has melted. The frequency of El Nino and La Nina events, chaos theory, right? But we had a spike, if you see that. I don't remember if it was the USDA report or not back then, but we had a spike around June 30th, right, into early July. I think there was some dryness and some heat in parts of the Corn Belt back then. We don't have that for more than just a few days coming up, right? Back then it was a drier soils. And then look what happened after the 10th, the 14th of July. We had about 4 or 5 weeks of normal to cool weather, a little bit of dryness in the Northwest Belt, but not enough to create any major concern. 80% of the crop was in good condition by the end of the summer, and that's what happened. So could that scenario happen again? I don't think we're going to spike like we did back in 2015 right now. I think we're going to tend to chop steady to lower. We have, depending on future USD reports coming up later this summer, I just don't have a lot of hope, unfortunately, for a major bull run at this point.
I probably should have had you define this in the very beginning. You've said it a couple of times that we're not in a super El Nino yet. Tell me, what is super El Nino?
Well, it has to do with ocean temperatures from Peru all the way across to the east of Australia being at least about 3 degrees Celsius warmer than normal. We're seeing that near Peru right now, so it is developing toward that. But it also has to do with something called the Southern Oscillation Index, global angular momentum, other teleconnections that involve the trade winds that create whether we have a super El Nino or not. During La Nina, the winds blow from east to west across Peru into the Central Pacific, bring upwell and cool the waters, right? Cools the Central Pacific, creates droughts sometimes in the Midwest, unfortunately for farmers, and also in Brazil, or southern Brazil and Argentina. With El Nino, those trade winds weaken. The winds don't blow as quickly from east to west. Super El Nino, they're not blowing at all. There's no, right? And that could destroy. I remember the anchovy catch was destroyed back in 1973, and there was an incredible demand for soybean meal for cattle around the world. It was really the first official El Nino that had a big impact on the consumer price index and also commodities, right? There was no trade winds, there was no upwelling of cold water, and billions of fish died around Peru, and all these cattle farmers around the world and end users in soybeans, producing soybean meal and soybean oil, we're going nuts buying meal because they couldn't supplement anchovies for that. I don't know if you remember that. I was about 12 years old back then.
Soybeans used because of the anchovies were killed.
Soybean meal skyrocketed during the El Nino of 73 because all the anchovies that were used for livestock were basically gone because of the strong super El Nino, right? And that was really the first documented super strong El Nino that I think consumers, the government really started following. That was the first one that created an inflationary spiral, not only in soybean meal, but many commodities like cocoa, for example, and coffee. And ever since then, El Nino has been in vogue, right, over the last 40 to 50 years.
You want to dip your toe into inflation on commodities? We could, because you could say if we're into that similar situation now with a head start on inflation, we didn't need the anchovies to die. We've already got it going on here because of various factors that you've already covered. I'm not going to let you answer that one because we would both get into trouble. Let's move to the next thing. You have hedged a little bit on your predictions of forecasts. There are some, though, that think we're going to have a dry July. Why do they believe that?
Well, one of the models that I think you see there says some models have a dry July in the Western Belt. Models can often be wrong. A lot of these models are going for a drought last year because of La Nina. It never happened. The European model I look at the GFS model. There's a Japanese model, but I try to use these teleconnections that we talked about before to second guess that. Yes, I think this is going to be the first time that there will be areas of dryness. We're already seeing it, though there's some rain here in the short term from the Northwest Corn Belt. There are going to be some dry pockets, and that tends to happen occasionally in some of these El Nino events. I think I alluded to before the severe drought in Western Europe, and some of those El Nino events, 76, 83, 23, had some dry spells, but it wasn't a disaster. It wasn't accompanied by, no rain at all, like in 83, and 10 to 15 degrees above normal temperatures. I don't think we're going to have the extensive heat. So there could be some spotty areas of concern in the Northwestern Corn Belt over the next few weeks, but I don't think it's going to be a disaster.
We're going to skip over this next one because by the time people see this, July 2nd's already happened. July 10th would be really sticking your neck out. So let's go to the U.S. corn record streaks and the fourth year outcomes. You alluded to this earlier about adding record on record on record. This is a little more numbers to your argument.
Yeah, if you know of any other years that had 3 to 4 record corn crops in a row, let me know. Maybe I didn't do all my research here, but really there's only been a couple cases in the last 30 to 40 years. We've had 3 back-to-back-to-back record. And so it's difficult to, unless we had more of these scenarios, statistically it's not that significant. What it does show you is that, look at 88, for example. Yields tend to come down from previous records by the fourth year. But the 88 was a La Nina, so we really can't use that. 2003, 4, 5, and 6. 2006 was a weak to moderate El Nino. And we did have some of the dryness in the Western Corn Belt. You alluded to, Paul, some people are talking about some drier weather. Yeah, there was some concern, but huge yields in the Central Eastern Corn Belt. And as a result, 149.1 bushels per acre was still relatively large. So it's possible, if you look at that fourth year scenario, yes, maybe we'd have some dryness here or there later on in some of the Western and Northwestern Corn Belt. Yields may not be nearly as good as the Central and East, unfortunately. But on average, again, we're not looking at a crop, 5% below trend line. Maybe it's at trend line this year as opposed to well above on average.
Forgive me, this is my father coming out in his days of asking you questions. What if it's just all attributed to genetics, and that's why we've been able to withstand weather in the last 3 years? And that's why we've been able to improve. Because if you look at 85 to 88 in the genetics, that's 30 years ago, 40 years ago in the mid 80s, 20 years ago in the early 2000s. Things are different then. But I guess there would have to be some math of like percentages on the increase or something to justify this.
Well, trend lines have certainly jumped and changed because of genetics. Absolutely, these hybrids, Pioneer, et cetera, huge difference from what it was. When I was living in Iowa after college back in the 80s, and one little weather scare, bang, corn jumps 30 cents, and yields were really impacted by just a week of warmer temperatures. It's interesting because warm nighttime low temperatures used to really reduce corn yields quite a bit, right? We could have, daytime highs in the 80s and low 90s, a little bit of rain here and there, no big deal. But nighttime lows are 70, 15, 20 years ago, that could knock off 3 to 5 bushels an acre of corn easily. So I think you're absolutely right. I think genetics has made a big difference, for sure.
We've been able to withstand certain things longer. All right, let's look out to July and August if we could. You've talked about July a lot. Let's look into August. Western Corn Belt, Eastern Corn Belt, we've had a lot. We kind of talked about the north of the Ohio River has been ample, west of the Missouri has not.
So for the month of August for soybeans, if this El Nino strengthens, and by that I mean not only near Peru, but out in the Central Pacific, ocean temperatures are more than 3 to 3.5 degrees warmer than normal by late July and August. If the trade winds die, which means the Southern Oscillation Index is really negative, that tends to produce normal to cool summers, occasionally dry, but on average a normal to cool August, which would probably save the soybean crop unless we had July drier than normal, right? If we're kind of weak to moderate, it does open up the door, weak to moderate El Nino, for some occasional dry spells and some heat. Maybe we'd see a little bit of a rally during the month of August. Again, we have to see what the position transition index does. We have to see what the Indian dipole does. We have to see these other teleconnections that have an effect on our weather in the Midwest, not just El Nino. And that's still kind of a guessing point right now. The last 2 summers, was very confident in April and May we'd have record crops and generally really good weather. I'm not as sure this year. Now, some people don't believe in climate change. I really believe in it. I live in Florida. I moved here 15 years ago. The oceans were never above 92. Now they're 100. The Arctic is melting. Believe it or not to get political, it does have an effect on how much really curvature the jet stream has, how much the jet stream dips, how much of a northwest flow we can have. So again, weather is chaotic. There's chaos theory. Only God has monopoly on the weather, right? Things can change very quickly. So we're going to keep our eye on it. I think if we don't have a super El Nino by August, and it's still kind of weak to moderate, we could have a few problems in the Corn Belt in August. It's possible.
And that's on the weather side. But the through that everybody really wants to know is, what's this going to do to prices?
Well, if we have a warm, dry July, or August, particularly if we force more of these longs out of the market, now that the war's ended, now that the corn and soybean crop are pretty decent here in late June and early July, yeah, we could have a 5 or 8% rally in soybeans, 10% rally next month. Will it be 20 or 30%? Generally, that does not happen with a super or even weak El Nino. Occasionally, you have some hot, dry weather in August, but you don't have the full-fledged droughts like you do during La Nina events or the infamous 83 El Nino, the hottest August on record. That was a weakening El Nino. It weakened so rapidly from super to neutral, it created this dome over the Midwest. I don't think that's going to be consistent. Few areas of dryness, some occasional hot spells, but a consistent 4 to 5 week dry spell right now, maybe isolated to parts of the western and northern Corn Belt in August, but probably not over the entire Corn Belt.
I will be calling you in mid-August if I'm at the Iowa State Fair and I am dealing with 1983-like weather. You will be getting a call from me. I just want you to know.
I'm going to fly out there. I have to see some of my buddies from Freeze Notice from 30 to 40 years ago that I'm still friends with.
Right. That was on our bingo card of our conversation. Make sure we get mentioned on Freeze Notice. You've talked about corn and consecutive years for good production. What about the soybean yields after 3 consecutive record crops?
Not really a lot of data, I think, unless I'm mistaken here, there's only been really one case. It's a little bit difficult to say. I think to have 4 consecutive bumper crops like this, to me, it seems unprecedented. I'm sure there are other years back prior to 1980 or 1990 where there was 3 or 4 consecutive years in a row of record crops. But just from a statistical standpoint, it just seems unreasonable to me. And again, hybrids have changed, improved, right? Technology has improved. That's probably the only reason we'd have a record crop for 4 consecutive years. I think El Nino probably won't be super until later in September, October. So that does open the door for some risk for soybeans in August. Not a disaster, but not 4 consecutive record crops probably.
Let's close 2 things. We'll wrap it up. But first, before we get to that, let's talk about Texas and the drought there, and the Oklahoma and the New Mexico look at things, specifically in cattle country.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a multi-year drought there, really from La Nina that began a couple of years ago. And some of the poor folks down in Houston, all the severe weather and tornadoes in southeast Texas, haven't had a break. That's away from the main wheat growing areas. most of the cotton growing areas and the ranchers, obviously, from Lubbock northward to Amarillo, haven't got all that severe weather as much in tornadic activity. But typically with El Nino forming, the droughts that, if they exist, and they've had multi-year droughts because of La Nina here in the last few years, tend to ease slowly. Look at there to the right, in green and blue, between roughly October, December, very wet. Maybe even snow by December. But as you can see to the left, most El Nino events that were strong by late in the summer tended to continue to have this drought situation and didn't really get better until the following winter. So unfortunately, yeah, there'll be some rain here and there, but I just don't think we're looking at a full-fledged easing of the drought situation until after November, December, probably October to December.
And if I listened correctly, I think I also heard you say that doesn't sound like conditions ripe for expanding herds.
No, it's not. But I think, ranchers will have some big relief, I think, come this fall and winter. And maybe that would change then with expansions in 2027 if the El Nino continues into next spring and summer. And that's a big question. I'm not quite sure. It's possible we could have a 9 to 16 month El Nino that lasts into the summer of 2027. If that's the case, then I think we could see some of the best really grasslands and pasture lands in several years, probably at least a half a decade later on this year and maybe into the spring of 2027.
When do we know that El Nino's over? Do we know it within a week or two of things happening, like it's warmer, colder, whatever? Is it only just because of the temperatures off of Peru?
Well, of course, you look at what's happening with crops around the world. Well, sugarcane areas that tend to have droughts in Thailand and India start getting rain. If the situation changes in South America with their weather. But typically it has to do with the ocean temperatures cooling off, right, along the equator. A slow, gradual upwelling because the trade winds that are being killed, blowing from east to western Peru into the Central Pacific, right, the trade winds start coming back. You start seeing cooler waters coming up from the surface. Those anchovies coming back. And as the ocean begin to cool and we see the winds reverse, then that's an indication, if it happens for more than 2 or 3 consecutive months, that El Nino is actually dead. And it's a little bit too early to predict when that's going to happen. Most El Nino events can last at least 6 to 9, 10 months. Some have last longer. And we've had cases with 2 or 3 years in a row of La Nina events. I think 2010 to 2012. Could we have 2 or 3 years of an El Nino event through 2028? I think that's only happened once or twice in the last maybe 70 or 80 years. I got to go back and look at my research. But if that was to happen, that would be inflationary for sure, particularly in soft commodities, particularly in cocoa and sugar and coffee. Have a huge impact. And probably, Sean Hackett mentioned South American soybean production could fall because of El Nino. Argentina, not so much. But Brazil production would be impacted. So that's kind of a balance. They lose 10 to 50% of the crop in Brazil from an super El Nino, and La Nina, but Argentina has a great crop. That's going to kind of offset each other. If we have a neutral situation, El Nino dies, then it gets even more complicated. But it's rare to have both northern Brazil and Argentina and southern Brazil having droughts or even record crops at the same time. This past season, right, as we transition from La Nina to a neutral, we had really huge crops in South America. And one of the reasons that we've seen this market in soybeans drop about 10% here, the war ending, trade tariffs, but also because South America transitioning to neutral before we had an El Nino had such a big crop again this year. I don't know if that makes any sense. So
It does. It does. So let's do this. Last thing. The 2 headlines that you think we ought to know and go away with from what our current situation is here right now in July of 2026.
Well, I think we're looking at occasional dry spells in the western through northern Corn Belt, but because of the Pacific Transition Index being negative, this big dome over Western Europe because of other teleconnections with El Nino strengthening right now. The odds would favor, for the most part, the main heat dome being over the southwest U.S., occasional dryness maybe in the western through northern Corn Belt, but not extreme sustained heat. For the month of August, that could change a little bit. Typically, 2015, one of my best analog years, right, was generally drier than normal parts of the Corn Belt in August, but cool. If El Nino strengthens the super by 2015, then we may have some dry weather in parts of the western to northern Corn Belt. It would probably not be a hot August. It'd be normal to cool. That would keep us in a bear market. If El Nino does not become super by August, it's kind of weak to moderate, that opens the door to maybe some occasional crop problems next in August and maybe some reduction in the soybean crop. But any major disaster, 5 to 10% below trend line, 8 weeks of hot, dry weather like 1983, that's probably not going to happen. 83 was one of the lone El Nino years I can find with severe July and August Midwest droughts. I lived in Iowa and I had hair in my head back then when I was 24, riding in combines, talking to all these great farmers. That was a rare case when a super El Nino weakened so rapidly, it built up this ridge into the Midwest. It's really La Niñas, and we were lucky last year. We had good crops the last 2 years. Typically, La Niña events, with all these teleconnections I talked about, are the ones that create droughts and bull markets for the grain belt in the summer.
May the odds always be in your favor, Jim Roemer.
The force be with you.
The force be with you as well. You can read more from Mr. Roemer at Weather Wealth and also Climattelligence. Always a pleasure to have a conversation with you, Jim.
I don't know how intelligent I am, but thank you. No. I've been doing this for 45 years. It's always exciting, always interesting. And yeah, good luck to everybody out there. Hope you have a good summer. And we'll pray for higher corn and soybean prices as long as you get rain and cooler temperatures. All right?
All right, Jim. Thank you. We are produced at Iowa PBS. Our production supervisor is Sean Ingracia. His crew is Reed Denker, Kevin Rivers, Julie Knutson, Neil Kyer, and David Feingold. The executive producer of Market to Market is David Miller. I'm Paul Yeager. We'll see you next time.